Good morning again and welcome to the fourth hour. Always nice to have you along. Sorry to be just a few minutes late today. I got hung up in conversations with some folks around the building this morning. So let's see. A lot of this is following up on stories that I've shared with you previously. Let's start with Border Czar Tom Holman. I love this. Hey guys, Steve and David both here. Appreciate seeing you guys. Thanks so much. Tom Holman vowing to look into New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's remarks that taunted the administration to come and get an illegal immigrant that Murphy said was staying in his home. And so Holman was on Hannity last night. Said, I think the governor is pretty foolish saying what he said. There's a lot of that going around, isn't there? A lot of foolishness going around. He said, because I've gotten a hold of it. We won't let it go. We'll look into it. Then if he's knowingly harboring and concealing an illegal alien, that's a violation of Title 8 U.S. Code 1324. I will seek prosecution, or the secretary will seek prosecution. Maybe he's bluffing. If he's not, we'll deal with that. So this is what I love about the Trump administration. This is what I was talking about on the air this morning. You've got folks in the Trump administration who are calling the bluff of a lot of these folks. And they're just they're out there, they want to sound tough. I think whether it's Canada, whether it's Mexico, you got these people, whether it was Colombia, whether it was Panama, you get the leaders of these other countries, they all want to sound tough. And then you react and you're tough. And suddenly it's a different game. It's a completely different game. We've seen it time and again with Donald Trump. I think this issue with the tariffs, I continue to be blown away from by that and what's happened, and the fact that as soon as he says, "Okay, playtime's over. Here's what we're doing, and we're going to start that Tuesday," and he says this on Saturday, so we're going to start this on Tuesday. Boom, Monday they're making deals. I mean, that, my friends, is the art of the deal. That is how it is done. So while we're talking about the Department of Government Efficiency, I just eyeballed this story this morning. I've not had a chance to look at it much. I want to see what he's saying. So Elon Musk is reacting to Senator Chuck Schumer. He apparently was, Schumer saying an unelected shadow government. This is such a laugh coming from the Democrats, because I think what we are seeing right now is the, cover being pulled off of the shadow government that has been at work. So when Senator Chuck Schumer is out there, now suddenly, because one of the things, and I can't take credit for this, I think it was Rush Limbaugh who first said, Democrats are always accusing Republicans of doing what they're actually doing, right? So you see the Democrats in reaction here to what Elon Musk is doing. And so an unelected shadow government conducting a hostile takeover of the federal government. Oh, please. So what was Elon Musk's response to this? Schumer continued, DOGE is not a real government agency. Agreed. That's what a lot of us have been saying. It's not a government agency. It's not a federal government agency. DOGE has no authority to make spending decisions. No, but Donald Trump does. So again, what DOGE is doing is they're bringing that issue to Trump, and Trump is looking at it and saying, yeah, go ahead. So they're not making those decisions. Elon Musk said, hysterical reactions like this is how you know that DOGE is doing work that really matters. This is the one shot the American people have to defeat bureaucracy, rule of the bureaucrats, and restore democracy, rule of the people. We're never going to get another chance like this. It's now or never. Your support is crucial to the success of the revolution of the people. There you go. And that's what we're seeing. We are seeing a revolution. And I think many of us thought we would never see that. We would never see a resolution or a revolution, rather, excuse me, versus resolution. A revolution. We never thought we'd see a revolution of this kind in our lifetimes, right? I think many of us had been beaten down so much, by the federal government and by the left. You just feel, man, you feel exhausted, don't you? I mean, seriously, especially during the Biden administration, I would go home every day and it's like, I just feel like somebody just kicked the snot out of me. Every day it was that way. And it's not what happens once folks are allowed to get up. You're allowed to get back on your feet. And now it's another game, right? You're back in the fight. You're back on your feet. And that's kind of how I'm feeling right now. And it's amazing to see the impact that they're having. And we'll see what happens, whether, what Elon Musk has did. I don't always agree with Elon Musk. I don't. But I surely find a lot of this fascinating. It's just absolutely fascinating what's going on. And when Senator Chuck Schumer, somebody who I've never been able to believe on anything else. He's been wrong about virtually everything else. He was a solid supporter of Joe Biden's right up until the time he wasn't, like the rest of the Democrats who were all following in lockstep. It's just absolutely incredible. So Elon Musk, I'll tell you, if nothing else, it's amazing what has been happening. And this is what it takes. This is what it looks like to take the country back. It's not, I think it's ugly. It's messy. Democracy is a messy business. It really is. And it can be messy. And I think you're seeing a lot of that right now. The reaction from these groups that are getting their funding cut, federal dollars now are suddenly inaccessible. And I talked about this on the show this morning. Lutheran Social Services and their reaction to a lot of this stuff. It's like, what right do you have to federal money? How is that federal money being spent? It's one thing if Lutheran Social Services is operating solely on money that they've raised through fundraising, as a number of groups do. That's one thing. You start taking funding from the federal government, sorry, that's a whole new ballgame. And these folks they're just addicted to this federal funding. And you look at their response, and that's the proof. You don't need any more proof than that. Look at their hysterical response to all of that stuff. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Angie, private joke in D.C. Where is the most dangerous place in the nation's capital? Between Chuck Schumer and the news camera. You guys make me laugh. I love it. Now, Denise is bringing up an interesting point here. She says podcasts have been instrumental in people realizing that the mainstream media is keeping us in the dark. I agree. And I hope conservative talk radio has played a role in that as well. I think, I listened to, for instance, Clay and Buck and the stuff they're bringing forward. Markley, Van Camp, and Robbins, I just absolutely love. I think those guys are hilarious, but it's pretty crazy. What's Steve saying here? I watched some Democrat senator get denied entry to U.S. aid HQ. Yeah, I have got to say, just if you look at the news as entertainment for a moment, because I take this stuff seriously and sometimes too much so, because I can get off, you know, I get fired up sometimes because I love the country, man. I love the United States. I love this country. I want to see this country survive. And I'm not just talking about through my life or my children's life. I want to see for generations of Americans who have the same kind of opportunity that I've had in my lifetime. That's what I want to see. So I get pretty fired up about this stuff, but every now and then I think you just kind of have to relax, take a step back, and just laugh at the reactions of these people. I mean, it's just, they're hysterical. And I don't mean hysterical like in, I'm laughing hysterically. They're hysterical like manic reactions to, and we see it over and over. Whether, and primarily you see that from the left. Their reaction to everything is one of hysteria. And it's like, man, you can't measure your response. You can't have a measured response. I mean, there are times, it was a former general manager of Kettle Radio, Mike, who put it to me very well, one time. And it's something I never forgot. It was something that he mentioned to me because I used to, as we were first bringing talk to Kello AM, I'd been doing a talk show previously on KWSN, our sister AM station, and the folks at Mid-Continent Radio, they were our owners at the time. Mid-Continent Radio said, man, they were looking at the ratings numbers, and they said, it makes more sense to be doing talk. We had Rush Limbaugh, of course, was still alive at the time. So we were doing talk on KWSN. They said, it makes more sense to put our talk products on our bigger AM station. Because by that time, music radio on AM was really, man, it was on its last legs. Seriously. I'm not denigrating the work that Kello AM did, because I have really fond memories of Kello AM as a music station. And a lot who grew up in Sioux Falls do. So, but it was just, music on AM can no longer compete. Talk radio was that was not the case. And they said, why aren't we doing talk radio on our bigger stick? So at one point, so I'm over on Kello AM and I'm doing the afternoon show at that time. It's called Straight Talk. And so, I was more aggressive, and it was only a couple of hours each day, 2 hours each day that I was on the air. And so it was fairly aggressive. And my general manager, Mike, at the time said, he pulled it, he compared it to a gunfight, pulling out, you pull out your weapons, and he said, but you don't always want to shoot them, and that advice, I don't know why, that's always stuck with me. And especially in the morning show. And I try to be much easier going in the morning show, although it's difficult because the country's in such a mess. So for those who just want to gloss over the country's problems, there are plenty of other radio stations that allow you to do that. I just have a hard time. So I take this very seriously because it's my love of country. That's what motivates me. It's my love of country, my love of the United States. That's what I find motivates me. And I'm motivated by, these are the stories that folks deserve to hear. I especially felt that way during the Biden administration because, it was crazy. They were, the crap that they were bringing up and trying to misdirect. It was constant misdirection. That's what we saw going on at the Ministry of Truth. It was constant misdirection of what was actually happening, what was actually transpiring. And when you had Karine Jean-Pierre being called on that, she would just stomp off the podium. She was just done. That's it. Close her book and boom. And I thought, man, folks have a right to know this. This is the United States. This is not some, this is not a country club. They treated it that way. This is our country, man. We got a right to know what's going on. And I really believe that you have a right to know what's happening. And so I try to bring those things to you, especially in the 6 a.m. hour. The big stories, that's what that first segment of the morning show is all about. The big stories. These are the big stories of the morning. And I take them from a variety of different sources. And then we get into Belf's News Gallery, which is trending stories. Okay, these are stories that are trending. So they're getting attention online. Many times they wouldn't be stories I would otherwise talk about, but they are trending. So what I try to do, especially in that 6 a.m. hour, is to put as many headlines in front of you as I can. And then in the remaining 2 hours, we talk about it. I take your phone calls, we get your reaction, and we talk about those big stories, So, but I never forgot that, having pulling my, see, I get really touchy here because I know YouTube is touchy about any mention of, things that go boom, right? So, but that was the way it was compared to me is you pull those, but rarely do you have to pull the trigger. And that's a philosophy I really try to retain with callers. I try not, because I got some callers that can stress me out, as I'm sure you're aware. I try not to pull the trigger on them until I just can't take it anymore. Few other stories I wanted to share with you this morning. The Senate Finance Committee advancing Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination for Secretary of Health and Human Services. So he is moving past his hearings. Also, the same thing is going on for Tulsi Gabbard. She has been picking up some critical votes today. And I mentioned this early on in the program this morning about Donald. Hold on. I want to share that. Donald Trump is weighing a plan to dismantle the education department. I mentioned now we're talking about federal education department. I mentioned this early in the program this morning. So he could soon sign an executive order shutting it down. So they're saying it's unclear when he will sign it, but at least one White House official said it could happen sometime this month. So sometime this month, Donald Trump might. That's kind of vague, I know, but it's something he has talked about, shutting down the federal Department of Education and returning that money to the states. Who wouldn't be thrilled with that? I mean, seriously, where is your money better serving you when it comes to education? Are you better served by that money being returned to the states or staying in Washington, D.C.? Now, I got to believe that, a good number of you who certainly, if you're conservative in nature, by nature, that you believe you'd rather see that money returned to the state, and that the money is spent better generally by the state of South Dakota than it is at the federal level. So Steve is talking about callers here. See, I get distracted by your comments, which I appreciate. I'm not being critical. I love your comments. Steve is saying, I always look forward to Art's call. Is that because, it's gonna stress me out? He called again this morning, by the way, and I told Rose, and no. He was on yesterday, you know? And one of the things I'm trying to do, and especially, I'll be working with Rose. She's just getting started, so she's taking a little bit too much time with some of the callers. I need her to move more aggressively through the calls and make a determination. I mean, that's her job. Make a determination as to whether that person's got something to add to the program or not. And we had a first time caller this morning, which I was really glad to hear from. And I gave him a little more time. I even shuffled some commercials around because I wanted to give him time to be able to speak. First time caller on the program, had never heard from him before. And that always just tickles me whenever we get a first time caller on the show. So Steve's saying, I miss caller John that would never call in and talk about the subject at hand. You know who that was? That was actually, he was a member of the Sioux Falls City Council. His real name has escaped me for a moment. He called for years as John. He wound up serving on the Sioux Falls City Council. And I'm like, oh, thank God. I'm so glad I'm not a member of the city council. And Vince actually worked for Kettle Radio for a while. He was a salesperson. Later on, initially, I mean, he was a caller of the show, and then I think he had heard an ad. We were looking for sales folks, and he came down, and yeah. So it's funny. There are both advertisers and employees of Kello Radio who say, man, I wish I could call the show, but they don't want to. They know better. They have second thoughts, but they're pulled into the conversation. And I have told you before, I found that's true of a number of listeners who say, I listen all the time. I never call. I can't tell you the overwhelming number of listeners that I actually meet who will introduce themselves to me say, I listen all the time, but I'd never call. I would never call. And that's just an overwhelming majority of listeners. It's one of the reasons why you hear me. Talk radio has had challenges getting more people to call in because there are so many opportunities and ways that folks can interact with shows and so on now that weren't around originally. Originally, it was call-in radio talk shows. That was the only place outside of writing an editorial to the newspaper was the only place where you could have your voice heard. Was you called into the local radio talk show, and well, now everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. You see folks doing it like this. They're doing it on their vlogs. They're doing it you see these, Joe Rogan would be a great example. He's a podcaster, and that's his focus, and that's what he's doing, and he's interacting. And it's just so the world of media has just it's just really, really changed. But it's some of these I was talking about how increasingly difficult it has been to get calls, to receive calls. And that's happening and I mentioned this before, Mike Gallagher, who's got a national show, one of the most syndicated national shows out there. He's complained about how difficult it's become to get calls. And you would think, wait a minute, this guy has got millions of listeners, and he's having trouble getting calls. So if that's the case for Gallagher, imagine how hard it is for me. I've got a much larger footprint than when I was initially on KWSN. I mean, Kello, and then our FM stations, and And then Kello.com gives us a much wider footprint than we ever had before. But I'm just seriously, I'm a local guy on the radio. That's the way I've always looked at myself. I'm just a local guy who happens to be on the radio. Other than that, I'm just like anybody else. But imagine the difficulty then in trying to get folks to call into my show. So you wind up hearing callers that otherwise I don't like hearing a caller on the air multiple days in a row. And some of them will do that. And so I I I try to appeal to these folks, say, please don't do that. If you've called, limit your calls to a couple a week and give other people an opportunity to call in. The difficulty, as I said, is then people aren't calling in. They don't want to call in. And that's why you hear me then talking a lot more than, when I get into a segment and it's really rolling and the calls are coming in, I just shut up because that's your opportunity to speak. And so if I have a question, I will ask it, but I try to move through those calls and get your point of view out there versus my own. But getting phone calls, believe me, there is no magic recipe for this, because I have, even in just the last few weeks, did some additional reading, went back to some of my older materials, and they're saying, yeah, because if it was easy to get phone calls, everybody would be doing it. And it's not. It's not easy to keep the phones hopping, but we are trying. And now with Rose in place and she's doing great, it's a really welcome addition is having Rose on board. By the way, as part of that, other good news is that means our podcasts are up and running again. So for those of you who really appreciated the Greg Belfrage Show podcast, I understand you may only have a certain portion of your day that you can listen. So maybe you're listening in the car. Maybe you're listening. I know Steve at times he may be able to grab a little bit while he's at work. And so he may hit or miss, the podcasts are back up and running at Kello.com, and Rose is updating those. We worked on that yesterday. And one of the things, and we're making some advances in that degree along those lines, because one of the things that really it surprised me to learn, I didn't even have access to my own podcasts. I couldn't get into the program where we would post those, and so I'm like, I can't even get into them. So that's changed. So if Rose would happen to be gone or other things, in a pinch, I'll be able to post the podcast. So we're making some progress along those lines to make sure that we keep the podcast up and running, because I want you to be able to rely on those. So we're doing that now again daily at Kello.com. And I hope you'll take advantage of them. And in fact, a number, again, I'm speaking as to when we had the podcast up and running. I was always pleasantly surprised that the Greg Belfrage Show was among the, now again, we own not we, but Midwest Communications owns in excess of 90 stations across the country. So a growing number of radio stations that are owned by Midwest Communications. And I would see the monthly update come out, and the Greg Belfrage Show was among, the top 5 podcasts, sometimes the top 3 podcasts. Sometimes it was one of the top 2, so making that available again for you, I know it was appreciated by many of you. And that's something that Rose and I have been working on this week. Now, I know I've gone longer today than I do normally, so I'm going to leave it there for this morning. I'm going to ask Steve. See, yeah, exactly. And You never want your show to sound like that. Greg Belfrage and his 6 listeners. It's exactly what I'm talking about. So you really, and sometimes that's the way it sounds. And so we're better off, and I mean the show and the station are better off by not putting callers on and having it be the same callers every time. We're better off if I just talk, because then I've got control of the conversation. I know what I'm going to cover. Boom, boom, boom. Because I've showed this to you before. That's my stack of stuff. And I will tell you in sincerity, I touched on every one of those stories this morning over the course of the program. So it's a lot of news. And, especially as it gets later in the program, generally, most folks listen for 20 minutes. They listen on the drive to work, short period of time, and then they're off onto other things, or then they arrive at work and they may still have it on, but then they're involved in other things. So I rehash some of those issues, don't say exactly the same things, but I try to go through as much news as I can. But I would much rather, I know when issues are hot, folks want to call, they want to make their opinion known, and I want to share those as often as I can, which is why I'm always asking for your calls. But it is a battle, and sometimes it just, you never know. You never know what's going to catch. Sometimes you come in with material and I'm like, oh man, this is going to burn out the phone lines, and nothing. And sometimes, and I've told you this before, then sometimes you make some innocuous comment, boom, phones go crazy. You know, you just never know. It's a different, folks listen from day to day, but every day it's a different audience from the day before. You may have some that listened the previous day. You may have others that weren't able to listen. So you're always it's a new crowd each and every morning. And that's a part of what I love. Let's leave it there for today. Please hit the like button before you leave. 9 of you have already done so. My thanks. We're going to salute the 9 who have already hit the like button. Thank you. See, that really, you warm my heart when you do that. I really, really appreciate it, because I can see the number of people viewing versus the number who actually hit the button. So much appreciated. Have a great day today. We'll do it again tomorrow. Hope to see you then. Take care, my friend. See you soon.